Well, thank you very much for being here today to share this with us. And I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the beautiful country that we're here today. I come and work here. I've only been working here for maybe nearly a year, 18 months, I think. So it's quite new for me to be coming up and working here. And I'd like to acknowledge the country, and I'd like to acknowledge the ancestors, the elders, past, present and future.
Thanks, Valerie. And there's this is the way how Valerie and I kind of work. We chat and work together. It's important that the woman goes first. Can everyone hear me? It's important that the woman goes first. So Valerie spoke first. And then the father, because there's Mother Earth, Father Sky, Grandmother Moon, Grandfather Sun. And you always start with the mother, with the woman. So I too also like to say that I respect country. I respect those ibises sitting on the church when I was walking up this morning, that they've now found a new home after being dispossessed out at Homebush. I used to teach here, so there was never any much ibis around here 7 years ago. Or 15 years ago, I think I was here last teaching. See, that goes quick. So I'd like to acknowledge those fellas that have made a home now because they've been dispossessed out at Homebush. The trees that were given an inch of drinking water, and to show me that resilience that these trees have every day, that they're surrounded by concrete and they've been given a little inch. So that observation of those trees, of their strength. And then my assumption, they must have put that cement in there so the council doesn't get sued. But they didn't consider the tree at all. And I like to thank that little bit of rain this morning when I was walking up from Central. It gave me a little wash. So that spiritual wash that I got this morning for the things that I don't need to carry with me today. So I'm very thankful of those country welcoming me after I asked permission to be here. And I pay my respects to all those ancients that revealed themselves this morning.
Is the third person that's speaking today? Let's push the boat out.
Keep going.
All right, I've actually just wanted that. So I'll begin by reading, because I'll just give you a bit of what we're going to do, where you're going to be going. I'm going to start by reading, and then after that we're going to stop reading and we're going to sort of yarn and follow the slides. And we spent a lot of time yarning about this, probably about a month, I think. And we've yarned with a lot of different people as well. So it's not just us that are here doing this, obviously. And what we really wanted to do, and the reason why we're doing it, is we just wanted to share what we do. So not sort of, it's our story about how we work together.
And I've also got to give recognition to my uncle, because I asked permission from Unc that I can speak here today. And of course, which I knew should have happened, he gave me a slap, a hug, a teaching, and something else, all in the one little growl that he gave me. And then on my way up to Sydney yesterday, I popped in to tell him how I was with that little teaching, that little growl and hug that he gave me. I shared it with him, and he went, "Oh, good one." And that's all he had to say. So I had to acknowledge that old fellow who's been, my teacher for about 30 years.
Yeah. So, Do Rocks Listen? The Cultural Politics of Apprehending Aboriginal Australia Labour by Elizabeth Povinelli, which she wrote in 1995, begins. And this is a direct quote from her, so I'm reading her voice. So when it talks about I, it's not me, it's Beth Povinelli. So those of you who are familiar with her work, she's an American anthropologist based at Columbia in New York. One hot, sticky November day in 1989, a large part of the Bellewain Aboriginal community was gathered on the coast of the Cox Peninsula, across from the Darwin Harbour, to participate in one of the last days of the Kimby land claim. 5 of us, myself, Marjorie Bilbil, Ruby Yarrowan, Agnes Lippo and Ann Timber, stood back from the hustle of microphones and notepads and the hassle of non-stop questions from government officials for as well as against our side. The other 4 women ranged in age from 38 to 70. I, Beth Povinelli, was 27 and came from a variety of dreaming, in parentheses, totemic backgrounds. We stood listening to Betty Billwag describing to the Land Commissioner and his entourage how an important dreaming site nearby, Old Man Rock, listened to and smelled the sweat of Aboriginal people as they passed by hunting, gathering, camping, or just mucking about. She outlined the importance of such human dreaming environmental interactions to the health and productivity of the countryside. At one point, Marjorie Bilbil turned to me and she said, "He can't believe, Beth?" And I answered, "No, I don't think so. Not him. Not really. He doesn't think she is lying. He just can't believe himself that Old Man Rock listens," end quote. Some 20 years later, in her 2016 book, Geontologies, A Requiem to Late Liberalism, Beth Povinelli turns again to this piece, reflecting, and I quote, "The inability of the Land Commissioner and lawyers to believe is exactly what allowed them to enjoy authentic difference. Without fundamental changes to the metaphysics of the law, an experience of a form of difference that has been denuded of any threat to the hierarchy of governance in late liberalism," end quote. I begin with these practices by a non-Indigenous American scholar, as firstly, this focus on interrogating the forces impacting the otherwise can be useful for destabilising the hierarchy of the research gaze. Secondly, her description of the inability of the Land Commissioner and lawyers to believe helps us to articulate the restraint imposed by Western research practices that enjoy authentic difference and at the same time maintain a hierarchy of colonising governance. Our movement here is to be in relatedness. So then now we'd like to move to the slides. Shall I move the slide?
So one of the things we'd like to kind of talk about today is that we view research as a living entity. But I also want to put out there, our ancients never researched. They just observed. So just put that out there for the moment, and we'll get back to it a bit later. Our ancients never researched. They just observed. So we're going to argue, we're going to just have a discussion. We're going to have a yarn about how research is living because of all the relationships. We can't separate the relationships, even the relationship with country. So we're going to discuss that. So I want you to kind of think while you're listening to us. So what would this mean to you in this current moment? 2 weeks' time it might mean something different. A year's time. And you've got that time to sit and observe country as teacher or as knowledge holder. So what does this mean to you when we say research is living? It has its own life. So this is our story. So Valerie and I are going to just have a yarn of our story of working together, learning together, and with country. And how to do, I don't know if research is the right word.
Well, we could, I don't know, use it that means something else than what's meant.
As a living thing. So
I know something's coming, that's all.
okay. This is one of the most sacred mountains on Yuin country. It's our creation story. It's our story of how we should live. Everything we need to know is on that mountain. I've been given permission by the old fella who holds this story to share a little bit about this today. That's why I got a whack as well when I shared what I was going to put a little twist on it. I've probably walked that mountain, I don't know, it doesn't matter how many times, 40, 50 times. And each time it teaches me. That is the text of the land. It shows us how to look, listen and see country talk without voice. It shows us how to see the land talk to us, to observe. As I said, our old people never researched, they observed. Research is being in the future. The old people were always in the now. And if you look at this photo here of the 3 rocks, that's another teaching that's on Gulaga, that's in rock. It's not on a piece of paper, it's not from someone's mind, it's been placed in rock. We took some scientists down to this mountain one day. And they said, they showed us their theory, their assumption of how old that mountain was. They said, I can't remember, it was like 1 million, 90 million years old or something. And then when Uncle shared the story of the mountain, they would not accept our story. We accepted their theory, but they would not accept our story. The reason they didn't accept our story is because that would admit that our old people have been there for 90 million years. Or 1 million years, or whatever it was. Because that's how old that story is. They wouldn't admit, because that would be admitting that our story's that old. So I've given a bit of a whack. That's not how I usually work. Like old fella, he just gives me a little drip feed, little seed, little drip. So I'm going to be sharing a story with Valerie about how we've had that little drip feed relationship, just to move on, to see that research is not being in the now. So that teaching there, the bottom rock is where you come from, the middle rock is where you are now, and the top rock is where you're going to go. Past, present, future. The natural world, the human world, the spiritual world. There's so many teachings from that one rock. As humans, we just got to worry about being in the now, in that middle rock. We go to the past, we bounce around from the past and the present, because the past informs us who we are today. We don't worry about that top one, the future one. And as I was talking to Uncle about that, he says, gee, if you're going to talk to the researchers there, they're going to have to change their lives if they want to live in the now. So that's the kind of the whack. And with Valerie and I, we've just been and other colleagues, we've just been having a little step-by-step of understanding of how to be in the now. Did you want to share your little story about your little whack about being in the now?
Yeah. Which one? Just this week, maybe. Yeah, well, so like I said, Anthony and I have been talking about this quite a lot. So we talked a bit, and Anthony was sharing about a little bit about what Unc had said to him, Uncle Max Dulleman Harrison. And so then we kept thinking about it and talking about it. So I went away and started reading from Uncle's book, but the only part I could read was only 1 page, and actually it was only about 4 lines, so I was really confused. And then we were just madly texting each other about like Anthony was sharing a bit about how he was thinking about it, and so then I was sort of also trying to reflect and think about it as well, about this importance of, I don't know how much to say.
Yeah, it's just that reminder of being in the now.
Yeah.
She started trying to research instead of just sitting with the story.
There's the example there, right? Getting the books.
And I get whacked too. Like every now and then I get caught up trying to overthink it instead of just sitting with the story. Because the story is all we need to inform us. A theory is someone's assumption. And a lot of academia is about proving each other right or wrong. And I struggled with that, when Valerie and I first met. I said, why are you trying to prove each other wrong or right all the time? We look for connections and similarities and educate each other. Instead of that separation, because our whole culture is about finding connections instead of separations, which we'll talk about a little bit more as we go along. But Gulaga, the reason I got up there is it's there in stone, it's there in rock. All we need to do is observe her. We don't have to theorise her. It's helped us survive for thousands and thousands of years because the teaching's in rock. The knowledge is there. So I'll just let you sit with that for a little bit, and then hopefully we'll have that little step by step as we go along.
It's you again, Anthony.
Oh, you can help out. Okay.
I can have a shot and you can
Yeah.
correct me.
No, not correct.
See, there's a correction. No. It's sharing, isn't it? So what we're sort of trying to sort of think about is the importance of relationships, and relationships as not just being with humans, and being focused around that, but about how we think about our relationships with country. And I suppose one of the things that I sort of wanted to share as we go through this is, even if we don't, as a non-Aboriginal woman, I don't know very much really, but knowing how important it is and learning how to build respect is so important that it really improves our research practice. So that's sort of one of the things we're trying to share. And so this slide's all about relationships.
Yeah. So doing some research, and got to be careful of that bundi from that old fella. But I actually wasn't doing research, I was looking for similarities and connections. So I've come across Leopold's work, how he started that whole movement around environmental and in the 1949s, and his writing of it. And then I started to read a whole bunch of other things that come from his work from a whole range of different academics and people. And the one thing of my observation is that it stayed in the human realm. He got taught by his farm, his observation of a little flower in the desert. He got educated by him observing his farm for over a year. But all the credit ended up going to him, not to those plants and the desert and the trees and the things that he was observing. And then it was about arguments between people and people about the best way to have land ethics or community ethics or whatever that discussion was. Land was again removed in those discussions as an outside thing, as an edifice, I suppose.
Just reminded me of Uncle Bruce.
Yeah.
Yeah, just reminds me of this. If you've read Dark Emu by Uncle Bruce Pascoe or heard him talking, and I think that thing, like by not prioritising or figuring out how the land was teaching, so many mistakes get made.
Yeah, so Uncle Bruce is basically showing how the old people just observed country and worked how to work with country. Country showed them how to be fed and survive. Because the thing that brings us all together is the land. We all walk the same land, we breathe the same air, we drink the same water. So how can we all take care of the place that takes care of us? And our old people just observed how country worked and worked with it so they could be fed and they can reciprocate back to country so it maintained its life, its living.
So this next slide is about thinking about, and I guess it's sort of a bit of something to think through is when we think of research itself as living. Because one of the things that I think Anthony and I have been talking about is when we think about of research as living, one of the things that starts happening is we start thinking about relationships. So the beautiful practices of reciprocity that I've learnt alongside doing research with Aboriginal people becomes so integral, so inhering in the practice we do as research that I find myself pondering reciprocity even before I even think about what could be a research problem or question. And in fact, those things I try not to have them come from me. They're coming because they come from relationships together with others, people that you're working with together. And it's what do I, with the skills that I have, bring to that relationship. So we've got these two images here. I don't really want to say what you were going to say about it.
Okay. Well, I might share the one that's kind of, they're both country, but the one without the swimming pool. I got drawn to this area driving. I live in Nowra and I work at Wollongong, so I often have to drive, and I got called to go towards this little spot halfway up. And I went and sat and watched the ocean come in, and then I got drawn to walk around here. And I started walking around, and I got to this particular spot, and I froze. I had no idea why I froze, but I had to look around. And I got to this spot, and I looked to my right. It was right there next to me. You know, there's the cliff face. And I stepped back, and I looked back, and that was the shape of a vagina. So country was telling me that I was walking towards women's place. Country was communicating with me that's a woman's spot. So I stopped. I had a little observe to see if I could have a little watch. And then from nowhere the tide came right up and went, oh, okay, old fellas, I'm not even allowed to look. So I turned around and walked off. For half an hour, that didn't come up that high. It just came up, pushed me along, turned around, sorry, old girls, walked off. 2 days later, bumped into an auntie who's a very strong cultural woman, and I started telling her the story. And she went, yeah, I'm glad you stopped. And that's all she needed to say. But that's, you know, me. I've been so privileged and humbled by a gift from an old man and some aunties that have been teaching me for about 30 years. It's just that simple observation. And then I didn't need to make any assumptions or kind of research it. I just had to go to auntie. Thank you. She just said, yep, I'm glad you stopped. I didn't need to go any further. And then the other photograph is when I worked here for several years. There's a little story that there was a women's area there. So there's a particular area that I always used to walk around. I didn't know where it was, but I tried to always walk around because I used to like my swimming in those days. So I used to go to the pool. But I always gave recognition that those old girls would have been nearby. But at the same time, the men would have been somewhere nearby too. We weren't separated. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But there's two bodies of water that communicate. One, you've got to keep pumping chlorine, clean all the time, look after, and the other one, take care of itself. What do we want our students to be? Someone that needs to be looked after, cleaned all the time, looked after, or they can look after themselves. So how do we do our research? Or how do we become educators? Help people to learn to take care of themselves, to observe the stories, or live in assumptions? Always live in that future.
Yeah, and that connection, just because I was just reading the notes we made, and we're just yarning now, because we've been talking about the awareness and assumption thing quite a lot, and like the note we've got here with our slides is, and how when we do research to be aware. So there's a little thing there about, it's almost like, got to remind myself to be aware, and so those kinds of errors or mistakes you can try really hard to avoid going to places, or, as you'll see later, some very regrettable research practice that we wanted to make some analogies with about if we're working together, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal people, I'm speaking from the position of a non-Aboriginal woman, but it also applies, as Anthony's taught me, with Aboriginal people going to country or being on country, or just talking about that this morning as a Yuin man. There's places in what would be described as your country.
Not my country.
I'm corrected again. Custodian, where you can't go, but that awareness and the importance of that awareness and tapping into that awareness, right?
Yeah. And then accepting things, accepting that I can't walk any further. I can't have access, and accepting that.
Oh, yeah, that's the next one. You just pressed a different arrow.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, no, that's right. I was just confused. Okay, so this next slide's about reciprocation to the research. So this idea which we were sort of saying before about including all the participants, we're sort of trying to weave in here how we connect up with country and how we're aware of country. You're going to have to jump in here.
This is another little part of what I was sharing with Uncle, what I was going to do, that he put another little twist on me and got me to think about. And so I started looking at the word colony. So what is a colony? Anyone help me out? Beg your pardon? Yep, as possession is something that they can make money of it. What's that? Something estate, where you kind of sit there and you make money from everyone else reaping from it. What else does a colony mean? In its simplest form.
Where one group of people had power over another.
Yeah, another group of people came in and take over another colony. So another way of, if you look at it from a Latin word or a Greek word or a French word, it means farming, settle, husbandman. God, what the hell is a husbandman? So I had to do some research. It's basically a farmer. So when I looked at it, when the colony came, they cleared our trees. They cleared our farmers. Our trees contribute to the farming of this land. They cleared out some of our farmers to put in another knowledge system of farming. Then they had construction or destruction. Not quite sure. I've got to sit in the middle of that, middle space. Then they constructed buildings that weren't part of this country. Then they mined us. And they continue to mind us. M-I-N-D and M-I-N-E-D. And mind us as children. That's one of the good, fun things you can have with English. So many meanings with one word. As a homonym or an antonym but it helps us to explain. So we, in a way, kind of separate, break things down, colonise, because we're separating, to help to try and decolonise and reculturalise, to show the connectedness, the oneness. So I found that hard at first, that separation. So,
It's that point about relatedness that we were saying.
yeah, that point of relatedness.
Yeah, that sort of, which I guess what we're trying to do is to think through how we come into this kind of position of relatedness, and Anthony did a tremendous amount of work on that in your PhD. So that point about we've got the point there about decolonisation, removing the separation, and reculturalisation is figuring out how to implement the connection. And this point about women and men and men women, we talked about that a bit, and there's an important story to share, but at the same time we wanted to say that that, as Anthony said to me, the old people pointed out that gender, they understood all the range of gender diversity. So we're using the words man, women here for the point of sharing this particular story.
So, I can remember, I don't know if people know Auntie Grace Cosley. One day she took me to this spot near Nowra, and she had a couple of grannies with her, and she dropped me off and she said, I want you to walk down that way.
Grannies are grandchildren.
Sorry, yeah. So the grannies stayed in the car and they were kind of mucking up a bit, and I wandered down to this spot, had no idea why Aunt wanted me to go down there. And before she said, I said, oh, we came up here with a whole bunch of Aboriginal men and women. The National Parks brought us up here to look at this spot. And I'm the only person who noticed this site. No one else noticed it. I want you to go down there and see if you can find it. I'm kind of looking and going, what? I was only quite young then, and I'm walking down to this spot, and then I froze. Once I found it, it was a birthing hole. I'm sitting there going, why is Auntie getting me to come down to a birthing hole? And then I started going, okay, the men would be nearby. The men would have been nearby, protecting the women, doing their stuff, their own ceremony that the women wouldn't know about, just as the men wouldn't know what was happening at the birthing hole. But they're in that connectedness. It wasn't separate business.
And it wasn't like a protection it wasn't a protect, we've yarned about this as well, it wasn't like a protection like a hierarchy, like I think you can, I could automatically go, oh, if I did a gender analysis. It's more about relatedness. And so if we foreground the relatedness and the connectedness of working together, that overlay the assumption, we were talking about observance and assumption, you can...
And then I got another message from the old people 2 nights ago. I got a dream where these women came up to me and said, you've got to follow us, you've got to try and chase us, but we've got a 5-day start. I'm sitting in the dream, I'm going, a 5-day start? And they took off down this creek, and then I waited 5 days and then took off after them. Going through this creek, coming around, then I came around, and country eventually kind of melded into one into this building. And the soccer goals were inside the building, but the field was outside. And this person took a shot, and I knew exactly where that shot was going to go. It was top left-hand corner, even before they stopped it. I started to dive to save the ball that top corner, because I already could move before they kicked it. Then one of these women that asked me to chase them dove in front of me, saved the goal, had a cheeky grin on her face and walked off. And I'm there going, I knew where that was going. My sister told me where it was going. And then I woke up. And I was a bit confused. I was sitting with the travel, so I rang up Mooks, one of my sisters, who we have a lot of yarns about our dreams. And between us, we figured it out that, you know, the woman came first. According to Gulaga, the woman was birthed first. Us men are always 5 days behind. But I was there just in case she missed it. Not to do it for us, not to protect, but to be there just in case they missed it.
The togetherness.
That togetherness, but men's and women's business could be separated but connected at the same time. So that reads back to my story then. I tried to find where the men would have been nearby and I couldn't find it. I said I need a lot more time, but I knew the grannies were a little bit upset and wanted to go, so I kind of went back. And Aunt just looked at me and I said, "Why did you show me a birthing hole?" And she went, "Yeah, I've been wondering," because she's been observing me since I was a little fella. Without me knowing, she was guiding me to be here as a teacher. Until she told me 15 years ago that these old girls were guiding me here. And she said, "I've been wondering that too. Why have them old people been showing me women's stuff?" And she basically left it as that. We jumped in the car and we drove off. A year later, she came up to me and she said, "You know that place I took you to?" She went, "I want to start taking our young Aboriginal girls there and teaching about what it's like to be a mother and birthing." And then she just looked at me. And then I went, "And you want me to sit in a nearby area to hold you women in while you do that?" And she just went. "5 days behind." So that's about that connectedness. I'm male, but I'm also female because my mother birthed me. I can't disconnect myself from being female because I came from a mother. Women can't disconnect themselves from being male because they came from a male. But we can do things separately but in connection.
So, yep, I think we've said enough about that. So unfortunately, this is yours again, Anthony. We haven't sort of organised it a lot separately. So I can try telling the story and I can be guided, not corrected.
Simply put, we're going to kind of put it into a bit of a practical example of what we're talking about. So we've put the big idea out there, the thinking, and then we're going to kind of show, for me, this is my story, and Valerie was a part of it, and so was Jan.
Jan up in the audience as
Jan
well.
Ryder's
'Cause
sitting there.
Anthony told us we're his supervisors and we just hear he's not going to do X, Y, Z because of a snake. Isn't that right, Jan? Wow, okay.
Because
So-
we had a big yarn about
Yeah.
a methodology section.
Yeah.
And I got recommended to kind of look at these kind of authors. So after we had that discussion and that, I started walking up on Shoalhaven campus. I don't know if you know Shoalhaven campus, Wollongong. It's out in the bush with a few buildings. So I'm walking from my office up to the library. And right in front of the library door is a red-bellied black snake. Okay. And what I've been told from my old people, as a young fella, that if a red-bellied black snake goes in front of you, you turn around and go back. Not because of fear, nothing to do with fear. It's just you're not meant to go to that place at that time. And about 5 years before that, the same auntie that took me up to the hole wanted to meet me at Currong. And she said, "I'll meet you at the car park." And we parked there. I've been there my whole life at Currong, gone to Abraham Bosom so many times, but it's always been with family. So I got out of the car and I started walking up to go to the toilets. And there's massive, and I'd say 7 to 8 foot red belly went in front of me. And I kind of went, but I've been going there all my life. Oh, okay. I just went into the bush. And then Arnie turned up and I told her what happened. And she said, "You've always gone with family, haven't you?" I went, "Yeah." "What do you hear? When you were here and I wasn't here, what were you here?" "I'm a single male." And she went, "Single males aren't allowed in family areas." So when I went to that door, I saw the snake blocking me. So I went, I can't use those researchers as part of my methodology.
Just so you can't see Jan, right? Professor Jan Wright's in the audience there smiling away because we're reflecting on that moment. Hey, Jan, we were really sure we knew what Anthony needed to read. And we got told by country and we had to listen, didn't we? It was a pretty big learning process, right?
And then my reciprocation to that snake was to push him along. So I went closer and closer and pushed him in because there was a garden nearby. Pushed him into the garden, and when I couldn't see him, then I walked off. Because I know on the campus people panic, call Brad or Troy to come and kill it. So I went, thank you, old girl. Stepped up to her and she just slowly went off. And then I walked back because I didn't want her to get harmed. Because I know the assumptions people make or the fear around. But that living spiritual entity was teaching me, guiding me.
Yeah, I think for us, I'll throw you a microphone, Jan, but she's shaking her head. But I think for us, it was like this point here about, or it's in my notes actually, about the connections, everything being connected. Like, so for us as two non-Aboriginal supervisors working together with Anthony as well as Uncle Max as well, he was a very formal supervisor but not recognised by the university as such. You know, like how we had to be open, and I think we had to keep thinking about our assumptions, and sometimes Jan and I would go, oh, you know, and really learn, right? Jan's nodding. There's a whole story there, so I don't want to, we're a bit slow on our slides, but we'll move along. To Arnie Carroll. Arnie Carroll is doing a PhD together with Anthony and I. Arnie Carroll is a elder, and her PhD is actually also about country. So that's another, we had a little bit of a yarn with Arnie about what we were doing today, and she shared some things with us here that Anthony's put down and said that, you know, we could share here today. And it's quite important because the complexity, for me anyway, I think, would you use the word complex? It's probably not the right
number of layers,
of working together.
Makes it look complex, yeah.
Yeah, but in other ways it's just absolutely beautiful. And one of the beautiful things about our relationship, and I think that's that thing about relationship and connecting with country, and what I've learned, I think Jan and I learned how we had to listen with Anthony in the snake story, is this everything's connected, and if we are open to something, even though we don't really know it, but we know it's there with country, you're able to listen far more respectfully and be open to learning. So you're able to move into away from the microphone, a position of observing as opposed to one that's laden with assumptions, and maybe even if I don't want to, I keep thinking the word presumption, but Uncle said assumption, so something really important there. So I'm just aware, I'm sort of thinking you need to talk, but I'll just keep going and you jump in because you've done so much talking. But we've got a thing here like a story with Auntie, of not understanding, and I think I've read other colleagues as well talking about, and we've talked about it in our community-led research theme as well, so just acknowledging Lynn Riley and Tracy, hello, and Shala here, about the importance of not knowing, you know, when you're working together and you're listening, and so that's really important. And so it seems kind of strange that if you're a professor, you're supposed to know everything in your discipline in order to be able to work together with a student, but there's other kinds of ways of knowing not to know, especially if you're working with someone who's a senior elder, you know, who supervises according to a Western paradigm that person, and how do you work together? And as I think our responsibility in the academy is, how do we work with people that want to come and do PhDs together with us and make and sort of render the PhD experience something that can work in a reciprocal way, which is, I think, what. And Anthony and I had a very long relationship with Arnie, and there was a lot of checking out, I think, for me. I got checked out quite a lot. And so that's that point about the relationship with Valerie and Anthony, and the walking away is always a reality in any relationship. When there was a question about the supervisors changing because I moved to the University of Sydney, I have to say I nearly didn't sorry Deb, taking the job at University of Sydney was contingent on me being able to continue my relationship with Arnie. I wouldn't have taken the job because I couldn't couldn't hold myself because I've made that relationship. So that had to be fixed, didn't it, right from the get-go?
Because Arnie was going to walk away from a PhD if she wasn't me and Valerie on it. She didn't want to build all those relationships again all that time. She had the two people she wanted to work with, and she was quite happy to walk away.
So it's quite a significant kind of, the relationship, such a big relationship around in that respect. And I have to, and the learning, from my point of view as well, of course there's the reciprocity and the most important thing, but it's so much to be able to learn. And I wouldn't use the word privilege, but it's terrific to be a student, and to learn with, it's really interesting to think how much we learn with, we all learn with our PhD students, right? That's one of the beautiful things about PhD supervision. So there's people that are going into PhD supervision. It's a wonderful relationship of how you work together with that in really respectful ways. And my PhD supervisor's here. Hello, Jane, who I'm always quoting. So Gary over there, who's working with me, Gary Fry, he's been hearing the famous gesture towards that all of Jane's students, Jane, Gary, Jane.
And it's okay to say, I don't know. And then you go back to the source. You go back to country, that where all the stories are for thousands of years. That's how you figure it. Might take a year. I know another time with Jan, Jan I've never ever seen get frustrated with any student or anything, but I know she got frustrated once when I said, I'm just waiting for the old fellas. I can't move further because they're not letting me move.
But you got your not probation, you got your end of year report or something, or your writing or whatever, I don't know.
Can't remember what it was, but... So, and then Auntie Carol really wanted to put forward that, sharing is law and so is caring. So those two things are very important as being supervisors, as being teachers, as being people who are trying to make an impact and engage people in learning.
Yeah, Arnie really stressed the sharing is law, that nobody knows everything, and she really wanted to share that, boom, boom. But, that we share, with each other and stuff.
So when we're learning, we're sharing. Like Jan, Valerie and myself, we shared the whole time. I never saw, we had a relationship and those relationships changed in different contexts. And it was quite fluid. Time for me to listen, and there's other times where I was a teacher and vice versa. When Jan and Valerie were teachers, I then became a teacher, a student, and just listened.
And we talk about that. Like I say to Arnie, like there's been a few very, very serious conversations with Arnie as a supervisor, and I sort of sought her permission about to be able to say, I need you to do more of this, where I had to move into that role because of my responsibility as a PhD. So we talk about that, and we sort of move between all of these different relationships. It'd be a beautiful thing to write about, that thing. And that's me.
And even within the university system, I didn't care if I wasn't the primary supervisor to play the game, because it's more about the relationship with Arnie. Nothing to do with where I sat within university structures. It was more about maintaining that relationship with Arnie. And she's my elder.
And we mentioned Uncle Max being part of Anthony's supervision team. We did work out ways to be reciprocal. So part of that was actually supporting research that he's doing on country that he wanted to do. So we found ways that we could, use money and things like that to be able to get connected in that research, so we could do that reciprocity. So even though the system kind of didn't work the way we wanted to work it, I hope we did. We found ways to be respectful.
Yeah.
With Unc. Yeah.
Yeah. I used to hide on my front veranda. I hid in plain sight, so the community knew I was there. So I tried to figure a spot where I could hide, so I hid on my front veranda. But then Uncle and Auntie and that figured it out. And Uncle came up one day to me and he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm dancing with Elmer. That's what I used to call the PhD.
No, Elmer Fudd.
Elmer Fudd, PhD, yeah. Fudd, just dancing with Elmer. And he said, well, I'm sick and fire truck tired of non-Aboriginal people taking my knowledge, get their PhD or their master, whatever, and then I don't see bar of them ever again. what have you got in there? So I went to a section, read it out to him, he said, that'll do.
That's really scary.
He's had so many people where he wants to give, his mantra is, I've got to give it away to keep it. But when that reciprocation is not given, he makes him question what he promised his grandfather. He still gives it away, but he's a lot more cautious now. Or he palms it off to a few of us to kind of suss him out first and then take him to Uncle. Yeah.
So just a leap over to Lake Mungo, which is a long way from here. And the reason we're sharing this is because when Anthony and I were talking about some of the problems with research, some of you that are familiar with the story and perhaps even this fantastic documentary Message from Mungo, you can watch it on SBS On Demand, I think, or you can buy the film. This came because I was actually walking to work at Sydney, and I was walking through that place that's now called Victoria Park, and I was going up the steps, and I was thinking a lot, and then I remembered a scene from this that I wanted to talk about. And then Anthony and I yarned about it, so I was going to sort of briefly share this. And I've structured it in a way that's structured. The slides are all excerpts from the film, and I've structured it in the way that the film does it as well, which is the way that it privileges the voices of country and Aboriginal people. And then there's a piece in there by the non-Aboriginal scientist who makes the terrible mistake. So there's a beautiful picture, a still from Mungo. He notices that point there that Anthony put in, an ancestor discovered or revealing herself. There's two different, quite different stories there. So to begin with, I'm going to respectfully call this person Auntie Dorothy Lawson. And and I typed up the words from the film so we could sort of listen to the pieces here. And she says, I look upon her as our queen. She surfaced for a reason, you know. And that's how my aunties looked at it. She surfaced for a reason. So that's something that she's sharing in the film. And then Gary Pappin, and he's in the film in several different parts, and I won't do a cinematic kind of reading of it, but there's actually a beautiful piece by an Aboriginal scholar on this. She would be one of my aunties way back then, and she walked this country. She looked after the country. She was teaching her kids the way my mother was teaching me. So the way he's talking about Mungo Lady. Now, John Mulvaney's the scientist that did the infamous thing of taking the bones and putting them into a suitcase. And when I first saw this documentary a few years ago, these words really struck for me. And I'm not going to read all of them, but I'll just read the first part because I don't want to repeat the last line. There's a lot of sensitivity that I put it into a suitcase. It's all very well for the Aboriginal people today to say they were not consulted, and then there's that last line. And the point here is that if you think about if you think about the relationship with country, and you think about if you just have that there, you can't make that error because you really have to go and find a way to talk to people as a non-Aboriginal person. As a non-Aboriginal person, that's your responsibility, you know, as a non-Aboriginal researcher. So what.
And if you use the analogy metaphor thing that we mentioned earlier, when you're doing your research, are you metaphorically putting a body in a suitcase? Have you looked at the work with the community? Have you worked with country? And do you then walk off with that body in a suitcase and then justify it, like this fella did? So that's why we had that earlier slide, to start you guys matching it back to what you're doing. Or you might be already respectful, I don't know. I can't make that assumption.
And a slide from the film, and we talked a little bit about the word tribe here, and Arnie sort of talked to us a bit about how, and it was an important teaching to listen to Arnie talking about how Arnie uses the word clans, but in this film the word tribe's used, and so just to acknowledge that there's different ways that people prefer to be spoken of. But the point here is that there are 3 different peoples here that live, and they're custodians of this of the country. And so there are people, and so the point is that you're always on country, and to find ways to have those relationships, to be able to ask those questions. And there's a teaching here about this mistake that this researcher made that I think translates. It's just a good thing to remember in our own work. I know I find it quite eerie what happened, and I try to remember that. Do I go on? There's another beautiful screenshot, just to share a sense of the place. I've been near this place so many times, but I've never gone there. Not really sure why. One day I wouldn't really want to go, but it's that thing about I don't really know how to go, I think. So, yeah. And the final word, like in the film, the final words, beginning words are with country, and the final words are with, beginning words with Aboriginal people, and final words is with Auntie Lottie Williams. And she makes this really important point. Bringing Mungo Lady back was good. So if you don't know the story, watch the film rather than me try to tell you. But I wondered why they took her away. That was the question unanswered. And what did they find out? What were they trying to prove when me and all the rest of us know we were here all the time? So who wasn't being listened to, right? So that wasn't news to us.
Just like a similar thing where I can remember on the news, scientists have discovered Aboriginal people had farming of eels. And then they interviewed an old fellow and went, all they should have done was ask me. Then spending $1 million of unveiling it, well, could have asked me, could have come and helped our community instead.
Now, Anthony, we've got 5 minutes.
Oh.
So we've got to just decide which one to go with.
What about the old fellow?
Yeah, we could go to Uncle.
Yep. So that was just a couple of examples of how we've been working with Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people and developing that relationships and the relationships that like we did with Jan, Valerie and myself and Auntie Carol. It's just that continual relationship
Nissa
of
Murray.
teaching each other and Nissa.
Yep.
And so that was just we're gonna show a few examples of what we've been doing, but as usual, I don't stick to slides.
So we go with this one. So just this slide before, just to finish with Uncle. This is a still of Uncle at the fish traps. I've never been there. I don't.
No,
But I just know the stories of it. So I'm hoping I get to. Have you? Jan's been. It's fantastic. Do you want to share anything? No, just. Yeah. So there's a beautiful documentary piece on SBS that you can watch about that. It's stunning. And this is Uncle telling the story, if I can click over to it, about how he learned about the fish traps. And it's beautiful on many, many levels when you listen to
And
it.
connect that observation.
All right, I've actually got it prepped here. Let's hope it all works.
Sound.
Sound.
Oh, that's hard.
So when I was this young teenager, I was told to sit on my butt for hours and watch the ocean come in from both sides.
Oh, it's not showing
And
it.
you'd see the water hit and splash and then go down and run down and then run to this pool. And they set me in the right place, these uncles and grandfather of mine. So I thought, what am I doing? Yeah, agitated, and I knew the old fellas was ready to chuck a bundi at me. So I sat down again and I worked the bum,
I was doing this on our
into the
screen.
ground, and I sat there and I watched again and for hours. And then they said to me, "You had enough now." Had enough of what? So you got to come back tomorrow. You got to watch this. You got to watch this when that moon comes. You got to watch this when grandmother moon comes up, and you watch the change of the water. Oh, I said, so what am I watching? You're watching the fish traps. And these fish traps were done some 12, 13,000 years ago. And your two waters are coming in like this, both ways, and splashing up. And when they bring when the water comes in, it brings the fish in, and then the stones are set and it's channeled down to this great big pool. And that's where these fish are then taken. But the miraculous thing about that is to be able to sit there and watch. Sit there and watch the movement of Grandmother Moon. Grandmother Moon, Grandfather Sun are the two important things of living on Mother Earth and looking at Father Sky. They're very important. They're very important grandparents and parents, besides our flesh, grandparents and parents. So to have those four elements of Mother Earth, the one that gives us everything, and you think you might think what you're talking about, when you go and sit your bum in your car, where's that coming from? You might have bought it out of a car yard, but you got to remember where that comes from. That was birthed by the mother. So, sacredness and these fish traps are such a very important part of my life. I'm trying to get some money so that I can get some of the Yuan descendants from Wollongong to Eden to come in, and I can then have them there sitting on their butts and watching all the different rising of the moons, so that they can understand the level of the water and which way the water's coming in. You see, nature is the greatest teacher of all. And I had my grandfather and my uncles to teach me that. Thank you.
So we might finish there. Do you think? Yeah. You don't need to say anything from that.